The issue is that, although I truly enjoy all guitar playing, I remember listening to guitarists as a child and really enjoying the fact that, even though you know it's an electric guitar with 6 strings, each person's interpretation and personality are completely unique. Rock history is full of legendary names that sound like a sacred chant, like Clapton, Page, and Beck. But what about Ritchie Blackmore? Why does his name tend to be forgotten and remain in the shadows of the time he was born? Let's find out why he is so unlucky to be remembered like his fellow band members. What does Jimmy Page tell him about him? Imagine a young child in post-war England, restless and inquisitive, walking through his new home when he discovers something unexpected: a Spanish guitar. No one knows where it came from or whether the previous owners left it behind. This helped define him as more than just another guitarist. He was a storm, unpredictable, electrifying, and untouchable. An abandoned family friend's artifact. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's there, waiting, and when Jimmy Page picks it up for the first time, his world is quiet. Alters was born in 1944 in the quiet London suburb of Page. His father worked in plastic coatings, and his mother had Irish ancestry. By the time Jimmy was 8 years old, the family had moved to Felham and then Epsom, Sur. By all accounts, his upbringing was typical. But at that house on Miles Road, something sparked. That nameless guitar left behind, like a secret waiting to be found, set everything in motion. By the age of 12, he was playing without the help of a professional teacher or in formal classes, learning each note on his own. A boy a few years older, named Rod Wyatt, showed him his first chords, which was all he needed. The Page was hooked, and on some days he played non-stop for 6 or 7 hours, unable to put it down before teachers confiscated it. He was drawn to the sounds of rockabilly, mesmerized by Scotty Moore and James Burton, the guitarists who performed behind Elvis Presley. And when he heard "Baby, Let's Play House," something clicked. That music, that energy, it was everything. But he sings 2 songs on it, and he just the whole delivery and the passion and the drama. And this guitar is great. Unbelievably, years later, when Led Zeppelin took the stage, Page would bring the same passion to A Whole Lot of Love, paying tribute to the music that first led him down this path. At the age of 133, he appeared on BBC One holding a worn-out 1959 Futurama Grazioso acoustic guitar that he had purchased with money saved from his milk delivery route. The guitar had a pickup, so it could be amplified, which was a small detail but a sign of where his thoughts were already going. Even so, he promptly swapped it out for a Fender Telecaster, the same instrument he had seen Buddy Holly play on television. Looking back today, it's easy to see the mythology building that this is. Well, the thing is that it was developed by Gene Parsons and Clarence White. Clarence White was a guitarist that I heard with the Birds on title, Delp, even though he had previously appeared on other people's sweethearts, the radio, etc. He was just a young boy with a guitar and a dream, practicing non-stop in his bedroom and carrying the instrument as if it were a part of him. Did he realize what was about to happen? Perhaps not, but in those solitary moments, strumming by himself and lost in the music, Jim Page was already developing into the guitarist that the world would never forget. Jimmy Page wasn't just another kid playing music, he was enthralled with it. But before he became a rock legend, before Led Zeppelin even existed, he was just a boy in England playing skiffle and blues and dreaming of making a living from music. At 13, he walked onto a BBC platform as part of a skiffle for Playing Away on All Your Own, a talent program for young performers. When asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, he didn't say musician. Instead, he said he planned to find a cure for cancer. Perhaps he knew that music wasn't a real career. By the time he was 14, he was playing in bands, first with Malcolm Austin and the Whirlwinds, and then with the Paramounts, where he played with Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis tunes. Because there weren't many musicians in the area, Page frequently had to switch between groups to find a place to play, but he was unrelenting. He carried his guitar everywhere, practiced for hours, and performed with everyone he could get his hands on. However, it was challenging because his teachers didn't understand his fascination with a deputy. At 15, the earliest age permitted, he left school for good, armed with his guitar and 4 levels. From there, I followed the long and difficult road of being a working musician, joining band after band, taking any gig he could, supporting poets, playing behind vocalists, and finally landing a tour with the Crusaders, led by Neil Christian. The tour was brutal, full of travel, no sleep, and a jumble of budget hotels. Miss Nicholson attacked him about his musical ambitions, calling them ridiculous and late-night shows. But it was paying off. He was making a respectable living, and it was finally proving that music could be more than just a dream. However, his body struck him repeatedly with glandular fever, which left him too weak to continue. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was his body telling him that he had pushed himself to the limit for 2 years, and now he had no choice but to stop. So he did the unthinkable, putting down the guitar and leaving. He enrolled in art school, switching from music to painting in the hopes of construct a life off the stage. But how do you break free from something that's in your blood? Even as he tried to recover, music never truly left him. The early 1960s were a flurry for Jimmy Page, when his guitar was barely out of his hands and his name was starting to be whispered among artists. He was still a student juggling school and late-night gigs at the Marquee Club, playing with blues greats like Sir Rel Davies and Alexis Corner, as well as Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton. These weren't just small-time acts, though. They were the one night someone noticed that Page was helping to shape the future of rock. John Gibb of Brian Howard and the Silhouettes saw something in the young guitarist and asked him to record a few singles for Columbia. That was all it took for the door to open, and Mike Leander from DK Records soon arrived at PA's first official studio session. The song, Diamonds, by Jet Harris and Tony Meehan, shot straight to the top of the charts. Wasn't merely a young man performing in clubs, he was a session musician and the secret force behind some of the greatest hits of the era. However, in the world of studio work, names didn't necessarily matter to avoid confusion with the well-known session guitarist Big Jim Sullivan. Page became Lil Jim P., an unknown hand in the background who gave his all while others took the stage. He wasn't there to be a star, rather, he was there to ensure that the music sounded right. Producers hired him when they needed insurance, because if a guitarist wasn't performing well, their solution was to rely on instinct and pure feel because he was unable to read music. When Shel Taley, the producer of The Who and the Kinks, noticed Page's talent, he began scheduling him for sessions one after the other. I can't explain it, but he played on Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger rhythm guitar, which was featured in the songs As Tears Go by Moran Faithfull, Tobacco Road by the Nashville Teens, and Downtown by Petula Clark. His fingerprints were on all the greatest songs of the 1960s. But no, while the world may not have known Jimmy Page, he was learning, honing his craft, and preparing for his moment. And when it finally arrived, he would be recognized. Even when he performed in the Beatles movie A Hard Day's Night, there was no fanfare or significant moment of recognition. He was just another nameless musician filling in the gaps. Was it frustrating or lonely to pour your soul into music that wouldn't even have your name attached? Perhaps it was something else entirely. Unstoppable. By 1965, Jimmy Page was more than just a session guitarist. He was influencing the music behind the scenes. The Rolling Stones manager Andrew Lug Oldham recognized something special in Page, and he hired Page as a producer and a manager for Immediate Records, a newly established label where Page was free to play, produce, and experiment. He believed that his days as a nameless session guitarist were over, or at least that was his perception outside the studio. At his peak, he played 3 sessions a day, 6 days a week, 15 sessions a week, and for what he rarely even knew what he'd be playing before he walked into the studio. On some days, he was backing a pop singer, and on other days, he improvised blues licks or other songs. In his brief songwriting partnership with Jackie DeShannon, his romantic interest at the time, they poured their hearts into melodies and lyrics. Still, like many things in his early career, those songs faded into the background. His fingerprints were all over rock history, much of it hidden away on obscure compilations. There were legendary jam sessions where Page, Clapton, and Beck covered old blues songs, just 3 young guitarists trying to outplay each other in smoky studios, and he even recorded a forgotten track with Keith Richards. He was tireless and exhausting, layering acoustic guitars on folk records, and even playing on the soundtrack to the Beatles' Hard Day's Night movie, titled Scarlet, a song that was never heard till 8:00 a.m. years later. When Page finished recording his solos, Keith took the tapes to Switzerland, and for years it was just a whisper in rock history. However, as the music industry changed, so did the work, and all of a sudden, the sound of rock changed, with brass sections, orchestras, layered arrangements, and the guitar getting lost in the mix. Then, the calls began coming in, and the background tracks that Page had spent years recording were Muzak elevator music. Then, as fate would have it, an opportunity presented itself when Paul Samuel Smith left the Yardbirds. A spot opened up, and Page for the first time had the chance to step forward, not as a nameless guitarist or a session player, but as something more. He had worked his way to the top of the music industry by playing on hit records, and now he was being asked to play nothing. He left behind a world that had shaped him but had never truly embraced him. By the mid-1960s, Jimmy Page was ready for the next chapter of his life. He was no stranger to the Yardbirds. In 1964, when Eric Clapton was thinking about leaving, he was offered a position in the band. However, how could he accept the position? Clapton was a friend, and Page wasn't the type of person to suddenly step in and take someone's place while they were still present. In addition, he was earning a good living as a session musician, working steadily, not sleeping on buses or playing in half-empty rooms. When Clapton eventually left in early 1965, Page did the selfless thing and suggested Jeff Beck in his place. Returning to the beginning, Page attended a Yardbirds show in Oxford that summer as an observer. But things happened when he was backstage. Backstage boss player Paul Samuel Smith announced that he was leaving, and suddenly there was an opening. Page took over on bass at first, then moved to lead guitar with Beck, while Chris Drea took over on bass. It should have been magic. Two of the most innovative guitarists of their time trading licks in the same band. But touring wore them down due to the constant travel and lack of major. It was all on Page's shoulders. The Yardbirds continued as a four-piece and released Little Games, an album that barely made it into the charts. They tried to keep things commercial in the studio, but something else was brewing on stage as their live shows became heavier, darker, and full of wild improvisation seeds of something much bigger. They had released Happenings 10 years ago, but soon after, Beck left too. They played their first shows as the new Yardbirds, but Page hadn't forgotten Moon's old joke about the lead balloon. Their manager, Peter Grant, gave it a slight tweak to Led Zeppelin. But now, let's see what Jimmy Page said about Ritchie Blackmore. In 1968, the band was disintegrating, but Page wasn't about to let them go to waste because he needed a band quickly with unfinished Yardbirds tour dates in Scandinavia. Ritchie Blackmore is an unspoken, nearly forgotten name that frequently fades into the background. Brian May, who once acknowledged how much he admired Blackmore, acknowledged that people don't talk about him enough. It's true that Blackmore wasn't just another guitarist. He was a force of nature, a technical mastermind, a trailblazer who played as though he was channeling something otherworldly. However, his name doesn't come up as often as it should. In fact, it's not the first generation of legends who discuss Blackmore. Steve remembers thinking, "What would my life have been like without this?" It's a haunting thought. However, Blackmore wasn't just an unsung hero. He had strong opinions. He once claimed that Jimmy Page had great ideas but lacked them. For those who followed him, who picked up a guitar because they heard him tear through Highway Star or felt the sheer weight of a child in time, he was a hero. However, his peers were never as vocal about his genius. He praised Jeff Beck's improvisation skills, but said he had trouble writing songs. He even acknowledged that Eric Clapton had never really inspired him as a guitarist in one interlude, joking that Ian Gillan, who could scream 12 bars in a second, wasn't really a musician. Coverdale, on the other hand, was just another frontman in a lineup of forgettable groups. So Blackmore holds a peculiar place in rock history. He was respected by his contemporaries, but rarely acknowledged by his peers. Those who know never forget Blackmore's peers may not have spoken his name enough, but those who followed knew the truth. His influence is deeply woven into the rock itself. In the end, don't you think that legends are measured by the fire they leave behind, rather than by how often they are mentioned? Pioneer, but not always a welcome one. Perhaps that's the price of being ahead of your time when you push boundaries. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about it in the comments area.